You don't enter here right away. Most people pass by this door for years. They feel its presence, but pretend it's not there, because beyond it lies not pain in the usual sense. Beyond it lies truth. This is the room where people are afraid to be real, not with others, but with themselves. It's not cold or dark here. It's too smooth, too safe, too controlled. This is a place where a person has learned to look, but forgotten how to be. You notice this almost immediately. The air here is still. Nothing crosses the line. No sound disturbs the order. This is what the life of a person looks like who has decided never to be vulnerable again. I've seen many people enter here. They spoke different words, but they felt the same thing. A tension that has become the background of life. They learned to be comfortable, strong, calm, rational. But behind that facade, there was no peace. Only constant control. Control over emotions. Control over words. Control over reactions. Control over what can be shown and what can't. Because they had already opened up once, and it had ended in pain. And from that moment on, they came to a conclusion that seems logical, but destroys everything. If you don't show yourself, there will be no pain. And so they built a wall. This wall doesn't look like protection. It looks like character, like coldness, like detachment, like, I'm just the kind of person I am. But that's not character. It's fear. Fear that if someone sees the real you, they'll leave. Fear that if you show your weaknesses, they'll take advantage of them. Fear that if you lose control, you'll lose everything. And so a person chooses solitude in a crowd, intimacy without depth, a relationship without risk. He says, I'm fine as is. But fine doesn't mean alive. There are many people in this room who aren't openly suffering. They don't cry. They don't complain. They don't break down. They simply gradually become empty. Because feelings that aren't experienced don't disappear. They freeze. And frozen feelings don't warm. A person can be in a relationship and yet be alone. Can speak and not be heard. Can touch and not feel. Not because there's a bad person nearby, but because he himself isn't fully present. He left a part of himself outside the door of this room. The part that feels. The part that is afraid. The part that yearns for intimacy. He decided it was safer this way. But safety without life is a slow disappearance. I often hear the same thought here, uttered in different voices. I don't understand why I feel so empty when everything seems normal. Because normal is the bare minimum of existence. But a person needs more. A person needs a meeting, a real one, without masks, without roles, without scripts. But for that to happen, you have to take a risk. And risk is what they fear most here. People who are afraid to be authentic often appear strong. They don't depend. They don't ask. They don't show need. But inside, they're constantly tense. Because being themselves means losing control. And losing control for them is tantamount to disaster. And so they choose predictability over intimacy, loneliness over risk, control over love. They don't let anyone get too close. And if someone approaches, They either distance themselves or take control. Control is a form of fear disguised as power. A person controls not because they want power, but because they are afraid of losing. And the more they fear, the more rigid they become. But the paradox is that control kills precisely what a person is trying to preserve. Intimacy doesn't survive in a cage. It requires trust, and trust is impossible without vulnerability. In this room, I've seen people say, "I don't need love," but that's not true. Everyone does. Some have simply learned to pretend they don't. They call it independence, self-sufficiency, cold rationality. But inside, they're simply tired of hoping. They're afraid to trust again, afraid to open up again, afraid to feel again. And so they live half-heartedly, not because they can't do otherwise, but because they once decided that doing otherwise would be too painful. But life without feelings isn't life. It's survival. And if you're listening to this now and feeling tense, perhaps you recognize yourself. Perhaps you haven't allowed yourself to be real in a long time. You haven't allowed yourself to say, "I'm hurt. I am scared. Ikare." Perhaps you've been controlling for too long, and now you don't know how to let go. I'm not going to tell you that you need to tear down your walls immediately. I'm not going to tell you that you need to open up to everyone. But I'll tell you the truth. As long as you're afraid to be yourself, you can't be truly with someone. As long as you choose control over presence, you'll always be alone, even if someone is around. Leaving this room doesn't begin with trusting others, but with being honest with yourself. With the question, what am I really afraid of? Because behind this fear almost always lies old pain, unlived, unrecognized, forgotten but not gone. And until it's seen, it controls. You can stay here a little longer. Listen to the silence. Feel the tension. But know this. This room doesn't lock you in. It simply shows that the price of security without intimacy is endless loneliness. And if one day you decide to take a risk, show your true self, let go of control, even for a step, you'll hear this door open, not loudly, no drama. It will simply become easier to breathe.